Welcome to another episode of Empire Apps. I'm Leo Dion. Today we have with us Erica Sadun. Hey Erica, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. It's actually been a bit of a challenge getting guests before WWDC because everybody wants to wait for WWDC. So I'm glad you could make the time to do this.
Well, we're in the age of the Rona, so I think people have a little bit more flexibility than they might normally have in terms of making little extra spaces or spreading the workday out in non-traditional ways.
Yeah.
So you timed it well.
Do you typically work from home?
There are times that I've worked from home. Last year, I mostly did not work from home, but that was pretty hellish.
Yeah.
So last year, I did a lot of commuting, in which I became absolutely addicted to books on tape, except they're not called books on tape anymore because I'm old. Audible sort of books.
Okay, yeah. That's the one thing I've missed. Like, I've actually had to allocate time to listen to podcasts and audiobooks because I don't commute. Like, even when I mostly work from home, but even when I did work from home, I still got out of the house and listened to stuff. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I make an effort to actually sit down and listen to stuff. So hopefully the audience is doing that right now with this podcast because I know how time consuming it is.
I've got to say, I loved commuting in terms of it gave me time to listen to podcasts and it gave me time to think and to chill.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But it was too much. It was too much time because I was waking up and getting out of the house by 5 a.m. So I was on the road by 5 a.m, which, by the way, in Denver has traffic.
Yeah, right.
And then I wasn't getting back until almost 5 p.m. Then I had to make dinner, take care of the kids. It was too much.
Yeah. Thankful I never have had that long of a commute, to be honest. So I don't miss that at all. So for those of you who don't know you, Erica, what do you do?
Oh, I take care of children, I cook, and I clean.
But you do some Swift too, right?
Yeah, I sort of try to stuff that in around the edges.
And
I do write books, I do teach, I do developer outreach, I do consults and, freelancing. It's sort of a mixed bag, but mostly I take care of the family.
So I've been to Try Swift and they're doing this Try Swift World stuff lately. And you recently spoke at Try Swift World, of course, is relative in our current age, but on the Swift Argument Parser, correct?
That's right. In fact, Natasha, who runs the conference, has been wonderful. So I've done about 4 or 5 workshops so far, with another few coming up this week and next week. And it's just such a marvelous opportunity to be able to run these workshops while, normal conferences just aren't really available. So I've totally been enjoying the teaching. It's something I don't do enough of, and I hope I get to do a lot more of.
So what made you choose the Swift Argument Parser for a topic?
That is such a good question. I'm doing several topics in the workshops, but the one that really got me started was the Swift Argument Parser, which just fit into this lovely niche of what would make a great workshop. First of all, it's brand new. It's only been around a few months, which means that it's a topic that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Second, it's not incredibly fully documented, which, speaking as someone who writes books and does teaching and so forth, there's nothing we like better than poorly documented or not fully documented material, because then, that's a business opportunity.
Yes, I can understand that then, yes.
It's also something really near to my heart because I love the command line, and I've been writing command line utilities for Mac OS or OS X or whatever preceded them for, a really long time. And this took something that was pretty much a pain point, which was establishing usage, testing usage, generating help output, doing type safety, and so forth. And it abstracted all those pain points away and turned something that I loved the result, but the process kind of was a pain, and turned it into something that was really simple, really straightforward, and I still got the lovely utilities at the end. So at this point, I'm just pushing out new command line utilities, on a near daily basis, because suddenly it just becomes so easy. And I'm saying this in the context of someone who has used Swift to do command line utilities. And I've used it both in shell scripting, because you can do that with Swift, and I've done it with compiled, but it's always been something that it never really was much of a pleasure to do. And with all the kind of painful stuff put to the side, suddenly I can just imagine it and turn it into a reality really, really quickly, which is one of the great things about doing command line as opposed to doing, whether it's an iOS app or Mac app or Watch app or so forth. There's so much more overhead with those. This command line utility, I think about it, 5-10 minutes later, hey, that thing is running. It's wonderful.
I couldn't agree with you more. So you're probably stuck at home and you're not sure what to do, and you think that maybe now is a good time to start a podcast. You're probably wondering, what are some great services out there if you're thinking about starting a podcast? Now, when I first started off, I built everything by hand. So as a developer, we've all done this before, using services like WordPress and Amazon S3 to host your podcast and hope that everything works okay with strings and tape until you realize everything falls apart and you need something a little bit more professional. Now, there's a lot of really cheap services out there, but unfortunately, a lot of the times they do stuff like throttle your downloads or insert ads, which just make your podcast not quite as professional. That's when I found out about Transistor, which is what this podcast is hosted on. Transistor is really a solid publishing platform for professionals, and it's really reasonable pricing, and it will help you distribute your podcast to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be. So if you're somebody who's professional or running a business, I can't recommend Transistor enough. They have detailed podcast analytics so you can see how your downloads work. So I have a great dashboard for seeing my downloads, how they grow, and how people subscribe. It is really great for creative businesses, professional podcasters. It's really a professional, solid podcasting host for people who are really serious about podcasting. If you are interested, I recommend checking Transistor out at transistor.fm, !via equals Empower Apps, to let them know that you listen to the show and that you are serious about looking for a podcast host. And if you're looking for something with a solid website hosting, just check out our website to see the stuff you can do with Transistor. Again, that's transistor.fm, !via equals Empower Apps. The link will be in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to our show. So yeah, I've built probably 3 different commands using the Swift Argument Parser. And there's been, I think I looked at, there was one, what was it called? It was like Doc Ops, where it's kind of a cross-platform API. Kind of think of it like reactive, how it's a certain set of terminology that you'd use and then apply it to different languages. And it was kind of the same thing where there's a certain set of terminology with command line apps that you would apply in different languages. And I tried implementing with that, and that didn't work out so great. And then I saw this Swift Argument Parser, which isn't even in 1.0. And I was like, this is it. And now it's it's almost like a hammer. I've pretty much used it in every single command line tool that I've been building lately. And it's fantastic. And it brings a lot of the, it brings Swiftiness, if I can use that term, to the command line. And as developers, like we use command line tools all the time, and it brings that like Swiftiness. Like I think of like stuff like Codable or like Swift UI and the stuff using with like property wrappers, and it brings that into a command line tool. And it's just so easy. It's so easy to get started, but it's also easy to like, it has that comfortable fit of like getting started is easy, but at the same time, like making complex commands is also you're not working uphill, so to speak, if that makes sense.
And it works really nicely with Xcode. So a lot of times you look at Swift Project Manager and you don't really pay attention to the Swift through the Xcode integration. And that's gotten so much better.
Yes, I agree.
So I can now create utilities, throw them up on GitHub. You can download them and compile them, or you could just Swift build, which is, the Swift build is the Swift Package Manager command, which does all the work without ever launching Xcode. And, there you go. Now, admittedly, Swift build doesn't have install yet. So you're going to have to either do a make install, and build your own make file, or do some sort of utility for putting it in place. It seems kind of ridiculous that Swift PM does not have, Swift install, but, eventually.
I was thinking about that yesterday. Like I started doing some research this morning. Apparently there's like a homebrew extension that uses Swift Package Manager. I want to check that out because that would be a decent patch. I mean, I like homebrew. I use it for a lot of my apps. I don't know about you, but like, I think it's actually an extension on Swift where you type in like Swift brew and then the like the abbreviated GitHub path, and it'll install the command for you.
Nice.
If it's a Swift package, I'll put that in the notes. I don't know if it works. It looks like it hasn't been worked on in a few months, but like heck, if I'll fork it and get it working, because I think that would be a great way to get command line tools installed.
That's cool. Now, when you say you do Swift brew, or you've done homebrew, have you created your own tap?
Yes.
Because I thought about doing that, but I haven't actually created a tap. So what's that like?
It's okay. There's App Speculid, which is for building graphics from SVG files for Xcode.
Nice.
So I started off.
Wait a second. Before we go even a second further, we'll get back to the brew thing.
Okay.
UI image. Why don't we have native SVG support? Why can't we have scalable graphics? It's 2020. It's not like vector art is, new.
Well, so they have PDF, right?
Yeah, they have PDF. And at first the PDF just got rendered, and it got rendered at a particular point. And then, it became slightly better.
Right.
I mean, come on, SVG.
Do you want the real reason, or do you want like the argument that one would make? Because like the argument that one would make is that, SVG doesn't have size, which it does, but whatever. And then also the idea that, and I think this is pretty uncommon, that you want to customize each size, particularly like if you have text inside a image. That's the argument that will probably be made. I disagree with it. I think SVG,
especially since text is very vector friendly.
Right. That's true too. Well, yeah, but then I could see how you could run into the issue of, okay, you use a custom font. Then how do you well, I guess you'd use a path. You wouldn't use actual text in the SVG file. That would make more sense. But in any case, yeah, it goes back to what you were saying, where like the vector can be blown up accordingly. So yeah, I know.
It is scalable vectors.
Okay, so what do our friends on the other side who do Android? Do they support SVG? Like,
I have no clue. Android people are always these lovely people. I always run into them, and they're always very calm and very happy. I don't know what it is. They are just happy to do Android, happy to be alive. A lot of them are using Kotlin these days, which is basically Swift.
Right.
They're all terribly happy.
Right, basically.
And I don't actually know what they do other than, produce things for equipment that I would never touch because I have some sort of weird, bias against it, which is, probably a completely unearned bias. But when I think of Android, I always think of, some sort of malicious, horrible thing that's going to come up and bite me. And I know we're going further and further away from the tap story because I want to hear about taps, but Android just sort of creeps me out.
But if anybody's listening who's also an Android developer, let us know. Can you, does SVG perfectly work fine on Android? I'd like to know. I know there's some really good libraries. So I started looking into some libraries that support SVG, and there are some that I could probably put in the notes. But yeah, it's not supported out of the box inside an asset catalog. So that's where Speculid comes in. It does all that resizing for you.
And there's the native Bezier path, right? Well, you can't use Beziers as images. And you should be able to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. So just to try to circle back.
Taps.
I started using Speculid as a tap, where it actually build the app and then install it as a command line tool. Mm-hmm. But I've slowly transitioned into making it as a Mac app. So in Homebrew, for a Mac app, you have to use what's called a cask. And then you can use, you can install Mac apps that way, which is one of the ways I do install some of the apps on my computer outside of stuff that I can just find on the Mac App Store. Mm-hmm. And so they have two different and they're basically I think Ruby files essentially, and you just have to specify certain all I have to do is put in the URL to where the app is and the the SHA 256 code for it, and then it just downloads it and installs it, and then just update the version number every time. But yeah, it's not that hard, honestly. I'll try to find some tutorials and post them in the notes for you in the audience.
Again, that would be really cool. Now, I've got to say, recently going to Catalina, I've had some brew issues. Specifically, I had a hand copy over Emacs because every time I brought over Emacs, with brew install straight on Catalina, it kills. It launches, it dies.
Interesting. The only app I've had that issue with was OBS, which is the used for streaming. Mm-hmm. But I really haven't had a lot of issues. That's just a regular Emacs is just a terminal app, right? For text editing.
Yeah, it's just a terminal app. So what I did is I brought over a Mojave install. And so I'm running the Mojave version of Emacs, and it's really frustrating. Catalina has not been a joyful experience for me. Catalina, in terms of operating systems, is a Swift 3 to Swift 4 transition. No, it was a Swift 2 to Swift 3 transition. It's
right.
It's been really miserable. First of all, Catalina killed so many of my apps. So I now have a second computer running Mojave so that I can just get work done whenever I need to.
Wow.
On the apps that no longer work, but that are still part of my, they're still part of my tool set. And a lot of them aren't being made anymore. It's not like I can upgrade them.
Is this because of the 64-bit stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I have a lot of niche apps, and they're really good, important apps that do important work. Now, part of this is also the fact that you can no longer buy Creative Suite. It is now a subscription.
Yes.
And that really irritates me. So I'm still using Creative Suite over a Mojave because I just don't want to be in the subscription mode.
Yeah, I totally understand. I dropped my subscription last year and I've switched over to other apps. Many of you have probably heard about App Store optimization and how it can get you more downloads. There's a lot of demand for apps right now, so it's a really great time to give it a try, and it's easier than you think. The folks at AppFigures have an easy, step-by-step guides and intuitive tools to do that, which many indie developers are using to get more downloads. The guys who run it are indie devs who had a need and created a tool. 11 years later, it's an all-in-one platform for developers who want to get more downloads and make more money with their apps. Try AppFigures for free. And if you like it, use our special code EMPOWER3030 to get 30% off for the next 3 months. Thank you to AppFigures for supporting our program. Have you looked at like other apps to do what you were doing? Like I actually started using Inkscape and GIMP. So FYI to the audience, album art, I do that in GIMP. It's pretty simple. So just change the background image and change the name of the episode and the guest, and there you go. Now we have album art for each episode. That's like fairly simple. There's some things I miss about Photoshop. And then, we talked earlier, like I don't edit anymore. So I just recording right now in GarageKit. So there's like a lot of stuff that I just don't use Adobe stuff. I recently purchased Final Cut Pro. So like, that's the other thing is you could look for alternatives outside of Adobe.
It's true. But with a lot of one's tool sets, just like with the command line, because they kind of go together, your goal is never the tool. Your focus is not the tool. Your focus is on what you're going to achieve, and you want to achieve that with the least resistance possible.
Well, it just sounds like you have a lot of resistance right now, though, right?
And when you're trained in your tools are trained in a certain way, your productivity just goes to hell when your tools stop working.
Yeah, I totally understand. Yeah, that can be a real challenge. So what other tools do you have that you use on Mojave?
Oh, I've got everything from video and audio edits to, which is what
is this like Premiere?
I've got the whole creative suites. I mean, I've got the full thing. Illustrator in particular.
Yeah. Okay, so we're still talking Adobe stuff.
Because I work a lot with, SVGs, and that's my tool.
Right. Yeah, that's the one thing I miss Illustrator. Inkscape is very okay. Very okay. You get what you pay for.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, it's funny. We did an episode last year with Daniel Jelka about Mac apps, and like you definitely have a feel. Like people complain about Slack, for instance, being like an Electron app, but like I don't know what they're building Inkscape on, but it's like some crappy Linux GUI library, and it totally does not feel native. And that's just awkward to work with. So speaking of tools that cause friction, Inkscape, like I go into it, I do a little tweak here and there, and then I get out of it. But GIMP is okay. GIMP is decent. I just wish some of the keyboard shortcuts work the way you think they would, but unfortunately that's not the case always.
Another thing is the Microsoft suite. Now you're going to go, oh my God, she uses Microsoft. And it's not something I do by choice. It's just an industry standard for publishing.
Right.
And, it doesn't work over here. It does work over there.
That's really interesting. I would think Microsoft wouldn't be too bad.
Well, they do now have a subscription model and all their stuff. But the thing is, every publisher you work with is going to give you, a dot file that, is then going to set up their particular standards. And, there are all the tools and so forth embedded in there with their particular ways of what is their standard for, headers and tables and all that. And it's really fussy. And it doesn't transfer to the new stuff. They are really, we're talking about dead tree technology using dead tree software.
Right.
And so because it's a tool of the trade, I can't walk away from it.
Let me ask you something about publishing. Like, is it pretty typically like, here's a Microsoft Word file or template, I guess, just work within these frames to create your book? Do any of them, especially because I would assume that you write mostly like the tech stuff. I would hope that some people would be a little bit more open to working with something like Markdown. Like that would be fun.
Okay. Let me tell you about Pragmatic Press. They are, I hate to use the word agile, but that's what they are. Agile has so many emotions and so forth hanging onto it, but in the truest sense of the word agile, PragPress is. And yes, for my books for them, I use Markdown.
Okay, good.
And I use Markdown with Markdown, and Markdown is great for Markdown.
I've heard of Markdown. I've heard it's awesome.
And, when you're self-publishing, because I've done that also, I have a pathway that starts with Markdown. Or should I be more, accurate and say, because I use Common Mark, I use, the Common Mark over Markdown, which is, standard space.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So like there's different dialects of Markdown. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, one is standard space, the other one isn't. Say what you will about, the developer. He gave us this wonderful tool in Markdown. You have on one hand this rather polarizing figure, but, even polarizing figures can do some really nice things for the world, and Markdown is one of them.
Mm. Yeah, because I use Ulysses for a lot of my writing. I love Ulysses. Unfortunately, most of my content ends up going into WordPress, which it's the best of worst options. And like, I see a lot of folks in the developer community. I'll just give a little inside scoop. I see a lot of folks in the developer community say, oh, published by John Sundell is awesome. Use published, da, da, da. And going back to using tools, if I started using that, and as awesome as it is, I would waste so much time trying to tweak it and put in pull requests for publish for his code and making suggestions and tweaking the code and not writing content. So like, that's why I end up using WordPress, is because it's a black box for all its good and bad points that I will avoid like trying to write my own CMS and instead focus on writing content like I'm supposed to.
Yeah, I've been using WordPress for forever, as well as, other ones that were proprietary to, Gawker or to AOL or Condé Nast and so forth.
Right.
But they're all really the same, or at least they were the same. And it doesn't really matter because all you're really doing is that you try to take the tool, make the tool disappear, and focus on content. And it doesn't matter how annoying the tool is. If you can abstract it away and focus on the content, then you're getting your work done. You're creating things of beauty.
Yeah. And that's the problem. I used to do, like, I did a Node.js static site generator, and it was just like I was spending so much time on like tweaking my JavaScript code and getting the page speed to be 1% faster. And it was like, no, Leo, stop. You need to write content. So like, yeah, I ended up switching to WordPress, and I've been on that for 2 years, and it's fine.
I think static sites have just seduced people. They love the idea of static sites.
Especially developers.
And then they spend all their time making the static site cooler.
Right.
As opposed to filling the site with content.
Right. Exactly. At least that's my weakness. So it's cool, and it's awesome that we have static site generators, and I'm sure you could build something in Vapor as well. In Swift, it's just like, especially if it's built in Swift, I'm going to have a desire to want to like tweak it and play with it. And it's like, no, just give me crappy PHP, and like, I'll definitely not be touching that anytime soon. So that's why I end up using WordPress. Hey, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We're going to continue the rest of our conversation with Erica in the next episode. So please join us then. We'll be getting a little bit more into the Swift Argument Parser and other things that Erica has been working on. So check that out next week. And thanks for joining. You can find me on Twitter at LeoGDion and my company at Bright Digit. Please do subscribe to the podcast. And if you have any reviews, please do post them to iTunes or Google Podcasts. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you later.